Welcome to Insurance Suits, a podcast brought to you by AIMCO, the American Association of Insurance Management Consultants. I am Chantal Roberts.
Hey everyone, I'm Amy Johnson.
So how you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah?
I'm starting to get a little tired, getting
Oh,
toward the end of the week.
yeah, I know, right? And it's cold and I hate cold. So there you
Yeah.
go. But that's just me. Are you a cold weather person or more of a warm weather person? Welcome to the Insurance Suits Podcast, a bi-monthly podcast brought to you by AIMCO, discussing the issues and the people who are involved in insurance. The views expressed by the moderators and guests represent their own views and opinions, and not necessarily the views and opinions of AIMCO, Insurance Suits, or its advertisers.
Well, I grew up in Minnesota, so here's the comment I get all the time from people. "Oh, you're from Minnesota, you should be used to it." I'll tell you what, you never get used to the cold.
I don't think
I I'm in Chicago now, have been for a long time, but um, I will never get used to cold weather. I will always be cold.
I was going to say we do video this. CMR Consulting proudly sponsors the video recording of Insurance Suits. You now have a choice of watching or listening to the podcast. Go to YouTube and search for Chantal Roberts or CMR Consulting. But I can see Chicago in the background, and it is absolutely
My
beautiful.
city.
Yes, it's absolutely beautiful. I, on the other hand, just have a bunch of flea market fake paintings, but they kind of make me laugh or whatever. So that's the reason why I bought them for $5 at a flea market. But hey,
I like them.
days. The monkey one really makes me laugh. I love that one. And then
I do too.
I bought the other one too, just because it kind of matches the colors in the room and stuff. So
I think it looks nice.
thank you. Thank you. So
I do like my little sliver of city.
I do too. I mean, is that like a church? I'm assuming that's like a church that's
It
behind.
is a church,
Yeah.
and the building behind the church, it's odd because the sky, it's showing to be all white because of the clouds, so you can't see the steeple.
Yeah.
But the steeple, there's a high steeple on top of it. The building behind the church is the Daily Center, which is the Cook County Courthouse.
So you're really close. That's nice.
Yeah, I can see a little bit of I think it's called the Chris Kindle Market that downtown has during the season, and about this much of that Picasso statue in front of it. So
Oh,
I'll
nice.
take it.
Yeah,
I'll
well,
take it.
I mean, why not? And probably people aren't signing in to listen to us blab about, where we are and what we're doing. They're here to listen to us talk about insurance and how people intersect with insurance and maybe things that attorneys need to know about insurance or lay people or even expert witnesses and consultants need to know about lawsuits. Yeah, it kind of goes both ways. And so it's one of the reasons why I like having this dynamic with you is that you are not only an expert witness and a consultant, but you're also an attorney. And so we can talk about how the whole mechanism, works. We have just had this terrific interview with Fred Fisher, and it was really great talking about all of the documentation and things that he talked about. He was a hoot. I wasn't able to make it. Thank you for filling in for me. I appreciate that.
Anytime. No, Fred was great. I'd say we probably could have talked for another hour. I think Fred could have talked for another hour.
Mhm.
He's got years of experience and knowledge and is passionate about what he does. I'm passionate about what I do. I know you are too.
Absolutely.
And I like the fact, Chantel, that you bring your, your past experience, not only as an expert consultant, but adjusting and claim experience it's always nice to get a fresh perspective.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about today?
Well, I was thinking about kind of carrying on with the documentation idea, kind of making a whole month of it. And we may have Simon come in, my cat, who may feel free to give us his own opinion of it. But I was thinking not so much maybe documentation, but more of the communication aspect of that documentation, because it comes up to be where if we're not documenting our files, whether we're an agent or an underwriter or a broker or an adjuster or even an attorney, I would assume an attorney also has file notes that they need to keep. But you may want to shoot out an email. I know that we had talked about this very briefly, that I said, sometimes I will shoot out an email or a letter saying, you said blah, 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 and I said blah, 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 and why that is important.
Well, also I'll tell you this. It is to communicate in writing like that is important also from this perspective. I don't know how many times I get an email in, oftentimes by an attorney who has misstated something that I had said, or uh, perhaps just misunderstood what I've said. And I have found the need to document that's not accurate. Here's what we talked about. Here's what the plan in place is. Here's what, you agreed to. Oh, is that Simon? Simon's
That
booty
is
in the
Simon. Yeah,
camera.
we're trying to. He's upset because I'm not letting him outside right now. So
Ah, but to correct the record is oftentimes something with important aspect of communication. Chantal, I've said this, I'm sure I've said it in a prior podcast because I've said it many times. With respect to communication, one of the things that I've said many times is because of being in house, I would go into a claim file and look to see what went wrong, what happened, why are there allegations, not even in a lawsuit, but why is someone making a statement that the carrier is acting in bad faith? I can pinpoint where things started to go south, and it's not bad faith, but I can almost pinpoint the date and the time that a claim started to fall apart or went south. And it is when the adjuster stopped communicating. It is when the adjuster started to ignore, or it is when, the adjuster perhaps responded impatiently. 99% of the time, probably. I can look in the file and say, right there, it's that email. That's where it started.
and it's
It
not.
started and no one saw it. No one picked up on it. And then weeks down the road, it started to snowball and snowball. And then all of a sudden you've got, an avalanche coming down a mountain when that was never anyone's intent. But it's when the communication breaks down. And oftentimes it's by an email or a deadline passed and someone didn't respond to it. It's I can tell you exactly when a claim goes south because of that.
And it's not maybe necessarily a claim, although I know,
Mhm.
I think I've mentioned it before, that a lot of times when things go south, even for a producer, like an agent or a broker, uh, these things turn into E&O, errors and omissions lawsuits or malpractice lawsuits,
Right.
or, whatever. And so if you have insurance for that, you can turn in a claim. So adjusters are pretty much always involved. We get our fingers in everybody's pies. But the point being that even if it is an agent, like what Fred was talking about, um, that isn't properly communicating, then that will cause problems. Uh, and I know that we have an interview set up with Leslie and Lindenberg. I think I pronounced that correctly. Her last name is Swedish, but she has been a retail agent for 18 years, and she talked about when we first met her at the AIMCO meeting in New Orleans about how she always had continuing education with her agents in her office, and it was communicate, 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 and write that stuff down in the file, because so often we get short memories. I know we've talked about that previously.
Well, Leslie's a huge component with the communication. Um, Internally at her agencies, being hands-on, picking a topic, having a weekly discussion, communicating with the insured, I think she has said before, she's mentioned, asking the tough questions that really aren't tough, they're necessary. They might be sensitive questions, financial information, loss runs, all that kind of stuff. And as an agent, she's a big proponent of that.
Absolutely. And let's just take like maybe a step back, because I was originally foreseeing that this podcast could help attorneys, could help
Mhm.
other expert witnesses, could help other consultants, and maybe even a few lay people would be listening to this. But one of the things that I told my adjusters when they came across this hard question that they needed to ask. For example, arson. I know you handle quite a few arson cases. I've handled arson claims before, and I would tell my adjusters, look, we have to ask in the recorded statement, did you
Mhm.
set the fire? And they're like, oh my gosh, no, I'm not gonna, the insurance going to get mad at me, blah, blah, blah. And I said, here is how you preface this. Dear Mr. or Mrs. Policyholder, I'm going to have to ask you this question. I believe I know the answer, but please understand that I must ask it. Don't get mad. Did you set the fire? And if you explain it to them, if you communicate, basically is what I'm saying, if you
Mhm.
tell people why you are asking things, then they will usually not be mad, because then they understand. If you just go, did you set the fire? They feel accused. Or if you say, I'm gonna need the past 3 years of your financial statements, your W-2s, your tax income, blah, blah, blah. That is definitely going to cause some problems. But if you sit there and go, I need these things because X, Y, Z,
Well,
usually
yeah.
people will understand it a little bit better.
I mean, here's the thing. I'll get on my soapbox here about the arson component. You wouldn't be taking an examination under oath or a recorded statement unless there was an indication that there could be arson. So, you know, that's the reality. You wouldn't even be asking the insured questions about it if there wasn't an indication that this might be arson and that the insured was involved, or that you're not sure, but there's something that's not right about that. So, it's not as though the insured has no idea why you're asking the question. Some of those questions, and yeah, I take a lot of examinations under oath, with respect to arson or suspected arson. And I I don't always go into a full detailed explanation of it. The fact is there are certain issues and documents and questions that are relevant to this investigation. The policy allows this kind of investigation, and it's part of the best practices of a carrier. So for me, I always ask that question. Did you have anything to do with it? Did you instruct anybody? to do A, B, or C, and,
Well, I think
you
that
know,
too.
it should be asked. If you
Oh, yeah.
don't ask it, you're not doing your job.
Well, and I think too, this is where, just as a side note, I get to play good cop, bad cop. And I get to be the good cop, so I get to be nice. And then if I still have concerns, as an adjuster that is handling the claim, I can sick you on them and then you get to be the bad cop. So then you don't have to explain. But I'll tell you one thing, we we did interview, or I interviewed, I think you were in court that day, Nancy Germain. And one of the things that she was talking about in regards to communication, I mean, if you notice here, all of our experts and all of our consultants with AIMCO, they all have a theme. And that is communication, documentation, all of this. And then there's various branches off of that. But one of the things that Nancy talked about was having that, I guess, consideration,
Mhm,
the politeness of it. And I suppose that that is kind of what I was talking about too. But I also had a point, uh, going back to something that you had said, where you were talking about something being misstated, or something,
mhm,
there's something in a letter that you do not agree with. Again, my unsolicited advice as a consultant to whomever may be listening would be, and this is what we did again as claims adjusters, especially when we got a letter from a plaintiff attorney, would be, you stated da 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 da, or I've received your letter of X date, please allow this letter to respond to that. And these issues are specifically addressing that in your letter, which I don't agree with. Um,
right.
and then of course, that doesn't mean that I agree with everything, but I'm specifically addressing these things here. And again, that might be just a little free advice that you get from insurance suits, for whatever it's worth, in regards to communication. So just because you get a letter and you don't agree with it, I would say you still need to communicate. You still need to have that open form of communication.
For sure. Well, and on the insurance side, um, and I say that as opposed to like a policyholder side.
This episode of Insurance Suits is sponsored by the American Association of Insurance Management Consultants, or AMCO, a nonprofit trade association comprised of insurance and risk professionals ranging from actuarial, underwriting, acquisition and transactions, and adjuster, agent, and broker standards of care. Find out more at www.aaimco.com.
It is very easy to look back and say, well, why didn't you just respond? If you didn't believe that or you didn't agree with that, all you had to do was type two sentences and hit the reply button. But you didn't do that, did you? Instead, you sat silent. So not only do you must agree with what was said, or you would have corrected it, but you went silent.
Yeah, and I think too, if we were looking at a lawsuit, and you probably know this more as an attorney than I know that you have to give all your bits and pieces to your counsel, as an
Mhm,
insurance adjuster. But what I always told the insureds, like, you need to tell me when you were served, because we only have so many days to answer this. And if we don't, we've basically admitted that everything that they said was true. So if the lawsuit says, your mom addresses you funny, and we don't say we object, then
mhm,
we've basically admitted that our mom addresses us funny.
right, right.
And I would say the same thing is applicable in everyday communication with our brokers, underwriters, agents, adjusters, lawyers, whatever.
Absolutely, and I will say this too, communication involves much more than writing a letter or sending an email. There even, like, my associates at the firm, there are so many times, even our support staff, where I'll say, you need to pick up the phone and make a phone call. Opposing counsel, I don't need to just, I can send a letter saying, hey, we're responding to your demand and we reject it, and here's what we're going to counteroffer. Okay, great. But I lost the chance by not picking up the phone and saying, hey, opposing counsel, I want to get I'd like to understand better why you made this demand, and because I'm prepared to respond to it, I'd like to do that, but I want to get a better understanding. And you learn information. Sometimes you develop a better relationship with opposing counsel. Sometimes you develop a better relationship with the insured. When I was in-house handling, I handled a lot of coverage B on the general liability side. So malicious prosecution, false arrest, defamation. They are highly charged emotional claims sometimes. Neighboring disputes where they're, paintballing each other's garage doors because those claims are fraught with coverage issues too. And they oftentimes want something from the insured that the insurance company can't do, like an apology.
Yes, I was just gonna say that I can't tell you how many claims I have worked where I want the adjuster to apologize for being rude to me, or I want the insured to apologize for injuring me or whatever. But you had mentioned a really good piece, and I'm going to try to remember, where you're picking up the phone. And of course, I'm getting to that age where I'm like, get off my lawn, kind of deal. But I am currently working an expert case right now. And I told retaining counsel, I'm like, look, this one section looks bad for us because all we're doing is we're sending emails back and forth. And this one section, the other guy won, quote unquote, won the fight because we didn't pick up the phone just to go, I don't understand what you don't understand. Help me understand this, because where I'm coming from, there's no coverage, but you say that there is. Help me. And instead of shooting off emails, cutting and pasting policy language, which, as we know, can go off wrong. I get accused of this so often, where I will be snarky and it gets misinterpreted. So
For sure.
and it happens to all of us. I mean, I'm not saying it's just me, but tone is so hard to read and
Or misinterpret.
exactly. And the way to do this is just to pick up the phone. And then again, by the way, I mean, just pick up the phone and go, hey, I'm offering you $1,000 to settle. Plaintiff counsel goes, absolutely not, you need da 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 da, and you'll be like, okay, I'll go back and talk to everybody about this. And then you send off a letter saying, I offered 1,000, you came back and said da 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 da, I will get back with you. Instead of just sending off that letter saying, I'm offering $1,000.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing. I just had a conversation on a case that's in litigation, and we are defending along with another carrier. But there are coverage issues. So not only are we trying to negotiate resolution with the plaintiffs, but we're also trying to resolve the coverage issues at the same time. And so I've called plaintiffs counsel, I've talked to defense counsel and said, listen, I want to manage your expectations here, because we are agreeing to do this for sure up to this point. I'm willing to go 50-50 or whatever. But I don't know that my client is going to continue to go down that road. And here's why. And I don't want you to be surprised when or if this happens. So I want to alert you to that beforehand. So the attorney went back, called me back and said, you know what? I talked to my client. I'm glad you mentioned that because here's what we're prepared to do. And not it's proactive. But that's what I'm supposed to be doing, you know? And to go back just briefly to like some of those coverage B claims, to pick up the phone right away and talk to the insured and say, listen, do not go over there to your neighbor. Don't call the EPA when they're changing the oil in their driveway and claim an environmental disaster. Do not paintball. Do not drive down the wrong side of the road, making it look like you're going to hit them. Please, I understand why you're upset, but we need to put this into a position that is going to help you get some resolution to this. And here's what may be the situation.
Right.
And manage expectations. Managing expectations is best done verbally
Yes.
because you're never going to get the context in the tone.
Yes. And I think, again, managing expectations is paramount to our communications that I'm hoping Leslie will be talking about. I also had a point, but I don't remember what it is because I'm just sitting there going, this is, I mean, you're brilliant. You're absolutely a genius. So I don't think I have anything else to say.
That's great. Well, here's the thing I like about Leslie too. I think her thoughts, at least based on my conversations with her, her thoughts on communication, like internally at an agency and with the customer, I think it falls right in line with that managing expectations.
Oh, yeah.
Like, hey, customer, and even Fred Fisher talks about this. What is it that you want? What is it that you're looking for me to do? What do you want from me? And let me give you this extra piece of information. I think you might want to consider this added onto your policy or this coverage. Have you thought about that before? Without having that verbal dialogue, I mean, unless you're going to bold or italicize all the words in your email that you want to stress, that's never going to be conveyed as well as it can be through a verbal communication.
Absolutely. And I do think that insurance is kind of, I say kind of, it is difficult to understand. And people's eyes, especially lay people's eyes, glaze over. And that's when it is good to have that conversation where you can translate things from insurance ease into English or legalese into English. And isn't that our jobs though? Even as consultants, to sit there and go back to our client being the insurance carrier or the policyholder, whoever happens to hire us, and go, this is what this means. This is not what you think it means, but this is what this means.
Right.
And we've got so many experts in AIMCO that can go over these sorts of things. And I kind of like these interviews that we're doing where and I'm interested to hear what Leslie talks about, what she says.
Me too. I think one of my favorite things about this podcast is being able to hear the knowledge and the experience. And listen, anyone who is an insurance consultant, who is an insurance manager, check out AIMCO. Not just to retain an expert, but consider being a member. www.aaimco.com. It's a great way to find a consultant, to find an expert. It's a great way to be a great organization to join as well.
That's great. So I think that this will wrap up another Insurance Suits podcast. I'm Chantal Roberts, and I'd like to thank my co-host, Amy Johnson. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk to Leslie. I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name because it's Swedish, but I do plan on making fun of Sweden and the Swedish chef from the Muppets show. So,
He is the favorite Muppet of our 11-year-old.
well, there you go. I mean, why not? I mean, it's great. Be sure, please, to like, follow, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite distribution channel and give us a review, because that will help distribute us to more listeners. Thank you. so
Awesome.
much.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.